Would you sell your car to go see your favorite DJ at your favorite club? Well, this is exactly the decision Hernan Cattaneo had to make in order to see Frankie Knuckles at the Sound Factory in New York City. Let's go back to the early 90s.
In this country, more big problems for Pan Am. Today, the airline filed for bankruptcy.
So it's 1990, and just before they went bankrupt, Pan Am Airlines offered triple mileage on every flight purchased. And to a young Hernan Cattaneo, this really didn't mean much, but to his friend Sergio Malnese, well, he saw an opportunity, and honestly, I wish I had more friends like Sergio Malnese, because what he cooked up was amazing. So Sergio and Hernan came up with a crazy plan. They would fly from Buenos Aires to New York, and then from New York, they would go fly to Europe to go explore London and Madrid, and then from Europe, they would fly back to Los Angeles, and then they would finish their trip flying to Hawaii. Now, since it was triple mileage, they actually decided that they realized that this flight from Buenos Aires to New York could actually fund the next flights from New York to Europe, and then Europe to Los Angeles, and then Los Angeles to Hawaii. So really, all Hernan had to do was to figure out how he could fund this flight from Buenos Aires to New York. And the only thing he could do was sell his car, his beloved Renault GTL 4 that he had actually saved up all of his DJ money for. But the thing was, nothing was going to keep Hernan from seeing Frankie Knuckles at the Sound Factory, even if it meant selling his car. Goodbye, Renault GTL 4. Hello, New York. So how'd Hernan even get to this point where all he wanted to do was see Frankie Knuckles at the Sound Factory? Well, we're gonna have to go back 2 years to 1988 when Hernan was resident of a club called Filia. Now I'm gonna go back to the iPad and explain what happened, because this was a huge big break for Hernan. So as I said, everything would change in 1988 when a new club called Cinema would open, and Cinema had 3 owners. So there was Pablo Ibero, and Pablo was the owner of Filia. But then there were 2 other owners, and one of those owners was Pata Caride, and then the other owner was Claudio Irigoyen, right? And then, so these 2 guys were owners of the club called San Francisco Trainway. And these 2 groups of people, these 3 owners, 2 groups, would come together to form Cinema. So Cinema would be special for a few reasons. And as you can imagine, before it was a nightclub, it was a cinema. And what they did was, if you imagine what a cinema looks like with the screen here, and then the seating here, and usually there's seats that go like this, and they're filled with seats in the middle. Well, what the owners did was they removed all the seats, but they kept the screen right here. So throughout the night when the DJ was playing music, they would actually show films on the screen, and it made for this awesome atmosphere, and it gave kind of like a visualizer to the night, right? But there was one more super important thing, and that was, let's just draw them in right here, the sound system. Now, the sound system was called a turbo sound system, and this was the top of the line for Argentina at the time. And it was installed by a guy named Darius Scalise, right? And this was a huge draw for not only the clubbers, but also the DJs. And this is where it got really interesting. So if you remember, we had Pablo from Filia, and then we had Pata and Claudio from San Francisco Trainway. They were the new ownership. Now, Pablo wanted our friend Hernan to be the resident DJ. But Pata and Claudio had other ideas. See, they wanted this guy, Juan Marcelo Bravo, to be the resident DJ. And Juan Marcelo Bravo was coming from another Buenos Aires club, the #1 Buenos Aires club called New York City. And it's so funny to me that all these Buenos Aires names take on the names of American cities, like San Francisco Trainway or New York City, literally named after New York City. But Pata and Claudio wanted Juan Pablo Bravo. And the reason is because he had a lot of experience and he was kind of, one of the biggest DJs in Buenos Aires at the time. Definitely had a lot more experience than Hernan. But Pablo Ibero said, I am backing out of cinema unless Hernan is the resident DJ. And with that support, Hernan was named resident DJ. But it didn't just end there, because when Hernan would be DJing in the booth, Pata and Claudio, kind of playing mind games with Hernan, would invite Juan Marcelo Bravo into the booth, kind of showing him the equipment, showing off the new sound system while Hernan was DJing. But, Hernan definitely had a lot of respect for Juan Marcelo Bravo, but this was his residency and he was gonna earn it, and he did earn it. And Hernan was named the permanent resident. And in the same year that Hernan's residency at Cinema began, he describes another miracle happening. See, Hernan had this friend named Carly, and Carly was a flight attendant. And whenever Carly would fly to New York, Hernan would give him a long list of these things called maxi singles. And what maxi singles were these remixes of very popular dance tracks, but they would have extended introductions and extended outros, which made it easier for the DJ to mix into and mix out of the track. So imagine like these Depeche Mode or New Order tracks with extended intros and extended outros. So as I said, when Carly would go to New York, Hernan would give him these lists of requests for him to go pick up these maxi singles from a New York record store called Vinyl Mania, where Charlie Grappone was kind of in charge of the music there, right? Well, on one of these trips, Hernan gave Carly his list, and Carly would come back with all of the tracks that Hernan had requested. But in addition to that, Carly came back with 2 tracks from an artist that Hernan had never heard of, and this artist was Frankie Knuckles. So for Hernan, Frankie Knuckles' music was love at first listen. And the next time his friend Carly was going to New York, instead of giving him a long list of tracks, Hernan just said, listen, whatever Charlie Grappone gives you, please bring back to me. And this is one of the ways house music first arrived in Argentina. So for Hernan, Frankie Knuckles' house music was the golden middle ground between American soul music that was full of emotion but sometimes lacked energy, and European beats that had a ton of energy with a powerful kick but sometimes lacked soul. Now, armed with these new house music tracks from producers like Frankie Knuckles and Lil Louis and other various producers, Hernan started introducing house music to the clubbers at Cinema by placing these house music tracks right next to the classic tracks at Cinema that the clubbers were more familiar with. Hernan's dream of being a resident DJ with his own unique style of music was coming true, and when he had the chance to go see Frankie Knuckles, his hero, DJ at the Sound Factory, this was just a chance he was not going to give up. He sold his car and he was going to New York. So in the months leading up to this trip to New York, Hernan could not sleep at all. When most kids his age were more interested in seeing something like the Statue of Liberty, all Hernan wanted to do was go see Frankie Knuckles at the Sound Factory. And up until this point, Hernan's experience with international DJs was limited to a single Graham Park gig when Graham Park came to Argentina. But Hernan learned more about DJing from this single Graham Park gig than anything else, and it lit a fire in him to go travel around the world to different cities and absorb international DJ culture. So Hernan finally makes it to New York, and it's his first night, and the first thing he does is go and get in line at the Sound Factory. He's the first person in line. He's there about an hour early, and when the doors open, he walks in, and the dance floor is completely empty besides a few workers at the Sound Factory, but already in the DJ booth is Frankie Knuckles. And this is where Hernan's education would really begin. Because rather than just roaming around the dance floor, what Hernan did was amazing. Right next to the DJ booth where Frankie Knuckles was, there was a staircase. And if you got a spot on that staircase, you could actually see into the DJ booth. And for Hernan, this was a dream come true. Every time he would go to the Sound Factory, he made sure he was early so he could get that spot on that staircase and actually look into the booth and see exactly how Frankie Knuckles was mixing these tracks. And once Hernan got to his spot, he was not leaving. And this meant for 6, 7, 8 hours, Hernan was staying right there without even leaving to use the bathroom, because if he left to use the bathroom, that spot would be taken. And then in addition to watching Frankie super closely, Hernan learned a lot by just looking out on the dance floor, because the Sound Factory dance floor was honestly the opposite of the dance floors he was finding in Buenos Aires. And what I mean by that is this. Sound Factory dance floor was really diverse. African Americans, Latinos, gays, a whole mix of different clubbers. And that is so different compared to the really conservative dance floors in Argentina at the time. To even get into the club in Argentina, you had to enter as a straight couple, one guy and one girl. And the Sound Factory couldn't be more different. And Hernan remembers a time when he approached an experienced clubber at the Sound Factory, and Hernan made a comment like, "Wow, it's amazing how diverse the dance floor is." And this clubber turned to him and he said, "Dude, you really think anybody cares who you are or what you're doing when Frankie Knuckles drops your favorite track on this amazing sound system? That's the only thing that matters to these clubbers." And it was really the only thing that mattered to Hernan as well. So this was the first of many trips to the Sound Factory for Hernan. And as I explained, he developed this routine where he would show up an hour early, be the first one in the club so he could see Frankie play what we call now as open to close or all night long sets, because it was very different to what Hernan was experiencing in Argentina. Because in Argentina, the night was extremely structured and extremely rigid. You had your welcome, kind of like the opening set section that was really low volume when everyone would come into the club. And then there was this thing called a liftoff track, right? And the liftoff track marked that this is when the dancing begins. And then for the rest of the night, for maybe 2 or 3 hours straight, it was high energy, high impact music. And the clubbers would just dance as hard as they could for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. But after like 2.5 hours, nobody had any energy left, right? So by the end of these nights in Argentina, once, by the time the DJ was ending his set, there was only a handful of clubbers left because everyone literally exhausted themselves beforehand. Very few people made it to the end. And that was the opposite of what Frankie was doing at the Sound Factory. See, Frankie was a lot more nuanced with his mixing, sophisticated. It didn't have these rigid moments of beginning, middle, and end. No, you would just see the energy build up over the night. And eventually, it would build to a point where everyone was going absolutely crazy. But the genius of Frankie to Hernan was his patience. His music was never so obvious. And just as well as, Frankie did obviously an amazing job of building energy, but Hernan learned that the genius of Frankie was also building in moments of the night for his dance floor to take a breather or take a rest while keeping the energy and the vibes going so that they could go for hours and hours and hours. And this patience is what Hernan identified as the genius to Frankie Knuckles. And then the night would slowly build back up again and then break down and build back up again, building back up to all the way to a point where there would be such an immaculate track that Frankie would play that even he couldn't finish up, and that would be the end of the night. There was no set end times or anything. And this is what Hernan learned at the Sound Factory. It's this patience that Frankie taught him. So throughout the 90s, Hernan would go and see Frankie as many times as he possibly could at the Sound Factory. And one of these times in 1996, it was probably one of Hernan's final times seeing Hernan at the Sound Factory or the Sound Factory bar. I'm not really sure which one he was DJing at the point. But during one of these times, at the end of his set, Frankie actually extends his arm without saying any words and hands Hernan a DAT tape of the recording of his set from that night. And I like to think that this was Frankie's silent way of saying thank you for being such a dedicated clubber and such a student of the art over the past few years at the Sound Factory. And even to this day, that DAT tape sits in Hernan's office as one of his most prized possessions. So if Hernan learned anything from Frankie Knuckles, it was this patience, that If you want your clubbers to dance for hours and hours, you're gonna have to play amazing music, but you're also gonna have to give them time to rest throughout the night. There's a time to dance, and then there's a time to rest. And this, I think, is, if we talk about Hernan's DJing today, this is his defining quality. This is why he can DJ for 24 hours at Stereo. This is why on the third day of his Sunset Strip festivals, he DJs for 7 hours just by himself, and the clubbers stay with him from the first beat to the very last beat. It's this patience. And it would be this mastery of patience that would ultimately launch Hernan's international DJ career and change his life forever. So let's flash forward to May 21st, 1999, and there is an iconic double booking in Buenos Aires. It is the Chemical Brothers and the biggest DJ in the world, Paul Oakenfold. And weirdly enough, the Chemical Brothers wanted to come on at 10 p.m., which for a night out in Argentina is extremely early. And then Paul Oakenfold was going to play more of the peak time slot just past midnight. So sandwiched in between them was this gap, and they needed a DJ to fill that gap. And the Chemical Brothers invited Hernan to be that bridge. Needless to say, the Chemical Brothers had the dance floor absolutely rocking, finishing up with a track like Hey Boy, Hey Girl. And Hernan's challenge wasn't, how am I gonna keep these clubbers keep dancing at peak energy? No, he remembered the lesson that he learned from Frankie about patience. And his job was to actually just get the dance floor ready for Paul Oakenfold. And at the time, Hernan was like Argentina's #1 DJ. He had a residency at Pasha. And everyone knew Hernan to play these peak time moments, right? But honestly, for this set, it called for something different. And Hernan would play 75 minutes of deep house, giving the clubbers a moment to breathe before Paul Oakenfold took the stage. And even some of the clubbers who knew Hernan from Pasha were like, Hernan, what are you doing? Where's the energy? But Hernan knew what his job was in that moment. And when he handed the decks off to Paul Oakenfold said this to him: "Thank you, mate. I won't forget this." And Paul Oakenfold did not forget this, because 3 months later, he invited Hernan to be his opening DJ on his worldwide Perfecto tour. And this would change Hernan's life forever, launching his international career. So the reason why I wanted to share this story is because I think all of us here look up to Hernan as one of the most successful and most impactful progressive house DJs of all time. But it's really, really inspiring and really, really motivating when you can start to see a little bit of yourself in your heroes. And there was a time when Hernan was just like us, where he would give anything, including selling his car, just to keep his dream of being a DJ alive and just to have the opportunity to learn from one of his favorite DJs. So yeah, I mean, for me, I get goosebumps thinking about this story because, it's a big question. Would you sell your car to go see your favorite DJ? For Hernan, that answer was a no question yes. That was the sacrifice he made. So my message to all of you is to just keep going. These DJs who are at the top have not been at the top forever. They had to work hard and they had to sacrifice to get there. And they were in the same position as all of us. So yeah, my message is to you, especially as we head into 2026. Keep going. You got this. Let's go.